Hi, everyone. I'm really looking forward to this one, and I'm really excited for you guys to watch it as well. Um, Hello, my name is Sophie. Good evening, happy holidays, and thank you for tuning in. We here at Books and Books, an independently owned bookstore in Miami, Florida, and in partnership with Miami Book Fair, are so delighted to welcome you to a virtual evening with Matthew Quick and Meg Wolitzer to discuss the new book, We Are the Light, published by our friends at Simon & Schuster. This is actually our last event of the year, so thank you, Matthew, Meg, and our wonderful audience for being a part of this. It's been an amazing year, to say the least. A bit about our guest. Matthew Quick is the New York Times bestselling author of the Silver Linings Playbook, which was made into an Oscar-winning film. He also wrote The Good Luck of Right Now, Love May Fail, The Reason You're Alive, and more. His work has been translated into more than 30 languages, received a Penn Hemingway Award honorable mention, was a Los Angeles Times Book Prize finalist, a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice, and more. The Hollywood Reporter has named him one of Hollywood's 25 most powerful authors. Matthew lives with his wife, the novelist Alicia Bassett, on North Carolina's Outer Banks. Visit MatthewQuick.com for more information. To moderate this evening's conversation, Meg Wolitzer is the New York Times bestselling author of The Interestings, The Uncoupling, The 10-Year Nap, The Female Persuasion, The Position, The Wife, and Sleepwalking. She's also the author of the young adult novel Belzar. Wolitzer lives in New York City. Just a quick reminder that throughout this evening's broadcast, you can post any questions you have below in the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen. We will be answering them at the end, so I really encourage you guys to participate. Please order your copy of We Are the Light from Books and Books and support independent bookstores. Now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage.
Hi, Matthew.
Hey, Meg.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm well, and welcome to our audience who I can't see, but we've all gotten used to this kind of thing by now.
Sure have.
Second nature. Are you in North Carolina right now?
I am. I'm in the Outer Banks,
Excellent.
right on the Albemarle Sound.
Excellent. Well, I'm really happy to do this. As we were talking in the fake green room, we met years ago, and we don't even know how long ago it was because time is just a big swamp. But we met in the Philippines.
Yeah.
We did a book festival that we loved in Manila a long time ago, and had some great conversations, jet lagged, but great conversations about books and life. And I'm really, really excited to talk to you about your new wonderful book tonight. So congratulations, first of all.
Thank you, Meg. Yep.
A couple of things. We can come back to this, but I was struck by the dedication of your book, which is for the wise and generous Jungian who finally got me to click my heels together 3 times. Thank you. I think we'll come back to that a little bit because a Jungian analyst figures sort of largely in the book. Do you have a way that you describe your book? Because I find when I do events like this, I'm always trying to thread the needle for people who have read it and don't want to, hear repetitive things, and people who haven't read it and we don't want to spoil it for them. So how do you just talk about your book? What's the way you talk about it?
Well, one of the things I've been saying on tour is that this is a book about radical love. And I wrote it, in the pandemic, amongst all of the division in our country. And, it's, as I was hearing more and more talk about controversial topics, like people were polarizing and splitting. And the thing that I was really feeling was this sense of loss of community, loss of unity. And I wanted to write a book about what happens when people can find a way to come together and rally around something and combat great evil in a way that doesn't divide. Which is kind of a lofty thing to accomplish or to set out to accomplish. But it was something that I wanted to set out there almost as a target, to kind of aim for. And so the book, it literally is about a town that is dealing with the aftermath of a shooting and all of the horror that comes with that. But the story is about a man by the name of Lucas Goodgame who takes on this young teenager, Eli, and mentors him and they create this art project that they imagine might heal their own souls in the aftermath of all this horror, and perhaps even heal the entire town, to reunify the whole entire town.
Well, that's a great description of it. And you speak to the intergenerationality that is at the heart of this book. Is that something that you think about a lot in your daily life?
Yeah. As a teacher, I worked with young people, and I miss that a lot. A lot of young people reach out to me because of my YA books. But I think really what I was thinking about was the work I was doing, as you mentioned at the beginning, with my analyst, who was older than an older man, and dealing with what Robert Bly called father hunger, which I had a lot of that. I had men in my life growing up, but they were very wounded and broken men. And I think one of the things I learned through the Jungian analysis was how I was yearning to be initiated into manhood or adulthood, and that I feel I kind of missed out on that in my teen years. And it was something that I was longing for. And as I started dealing with that in analysis and writing this novel, as I've been out on the road, it's been uncanny how many young men have come up to me, not only at my events, but in restaurants,
Really?
talking to, the barista at the coffee shop, and just kind of sliding into these conversations that always revolve around this idea of what is manhood in, 2022 in America. And these young men that are really just hungry to talk about ways for them to contribute in positive ways. We talk a lot about toxic masculinity these days, and that's a really important thing to talk about. But I think we don't talk enough about positive masculinity. And that is something that my analyst and I talked a lot about. Who did I want to be? And I think I had a very wounded sense of my own masculinity and my relationship to myself. And so that was something that I think needed to be worked out with an older man. And that was a big part of my analytic journey.
Well, it's a big part of the sort of scaffolding of the novel. I don't want to say too much to give it away, but when you talk about psychoanalysis, or analysis, a Jungian analysis, I was thinking that novels and reading novels remind me of that kind of experience. They're very intimate. They're very one-on-one, you and the novel. Nobody really knows what goes on when you read a novel, right? I mean, your experience of reading a novel is different from mine, and nobody can say what goes on. I love that intimacy. I love that quiet, that, it feels, when we talk about analysis, like we're in another era, like we're talking in the 1950s, as though everybody does this. And in fact, I don't know how many people do it anymore. It's certainly fallen. Real analyses are probably, it's a real minority of people who engage in that, but you've gotten so much out of it. Talk a little bit then about your relationship to the intimacy of the novel form, if you can, if you agree with me about what I just said.
No, I do. And, one of the things that comes to mind in Jungian analysis, we talk about the analytic third, so when I go to a session, Jung was big on talking about alchemy, so my analyst will talk about how when he comes to a session, he pours himself into the vessel and I pour myself into the vessel, and we become something that he calls the analytic third. And I think when you read a novel, that's really what you do. You have this novel that's coming from the novelist, and you're bringing yourself, and together you put those two things together to create a third thing. And I think that's why some novels might light you up in a way that not me, or vice versa. So I think this idea of bringing two different selves and putting them together and a third thing is created, I think that's really what we're doing when we're reading. And it is an incredibly intimate process. And I think that's something that we intuitively yearn for. I think that's why, even if we have a bad reading experience, most of us will keep going to the next book to create the next third, to keep finding, what is that experience, that alchemical experience that's going to light us up and really maybe lift us towards something akin to transcendence. We want to escape, the prison of just being isolated in ourselves. And that's why we reach for the book or the film or the play or the piece of art, so that we can have this third thing when we bring them together. I think it's very intimate.
Yeah, I love this idea of the third. I'm not well versed in Jungian analysis at all, and I'm, learning quite a bit about it, reading you and talking to you. When you began the book, did you have like an idea in mind of, I want to do X, like Mad Libs, I want to do this? I mean, I did an event on character with my friend Elizabeth Strout, the wonderful writer, and when she began Olive Kitteridge, she said something like all she knew was she saw a large woman standing by a picnic table, and she sort of had this visual image. I may be quoting her wrong, so don't quote me on that. But if she had a visual image of a certain, stately woman, and she worked from there. Did you have what was your way in?
Well, I did an event in the Ambler Theater, which is depicted right there in Ambler, PA, in 2014, and it was shortly after the shooting in Aurora, Colorado. And I remember being on stage where the movie screen was and speaking to a packed house. It was a lovely evening. But this voice in my head said, you have to write about historic theater. And I went home from that event knowing that I wanted to write about a historic theater and a tragedy. But I couldn't figure out the novel for a very long time. I tried to write it for 7 years, and I had so many false starts, and I just couldn't get it. And when I got sober in 2018, I went through 3 years of writer's block immediately after getting sober, which was horrific. And when I entered into analysis, it was with the intent of breaking the writer's block. That's what I consciously came to analysis to accomplish. But very quickly, analysis went in different directions, and it became about much more than just the writer's block. And that relationship I had with my analysts became the most important thing in my life. And of course, because I needed it so desperately, the dark voice in my head kept saying, this is going to be taken away from you. And so it became this paranoia. And so the book was really born out of those two things, that movie house experience. And I had some paranoia about going to movies after the shooting in Aurora. And then this paranoia that I was going to lose my analyst. And it was when I married those two things and brought them into the creative writing wrestling ring and tried to make sense of them, putting those two things together, suddenly I had this way in. It was also very interesting too. When I was blocked, my wife kept telling me to try to write another book in letters because I was writing letters to people, but I couldn't write fiction. And I resisted that for a long time until my buddy, Nick Butler, the novelist Nick Butler, seconded Alicia's opinion. And it was strange. As soon as I went up to my room and typed in Dear Carl, the writer's block was over. It was like, whew, it just opened up.
I have a friend, a novelist, who once said something about letters in fiction and in film, and in other forms of art. When a letter appears, the reader or the viewer in a film listens or watches with a new intensity. It's as if they're being given access to something private, something that is sort of illicit. And you feel that right away. This letter, this filled with melancholy and want. He wants something from his analyst who he's not hearing from. And you feel as if you're getting privileged information, I guess, which is what you do. I mean, a novel, I suppose, in and of itself is privileged information, right? But it's privileged. It's like a box within a box that you've created here.
Yeah, and I think it's there's a certain level of intimacy in the yearning when it's going one way, and I think that's for those of us who still write letters. I think that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to convey something about ourselves, and we're giving that to the other person with the expectation that something might come back. And in this case, as the letters go unanswered, it creates that tension throughout the novel. And I think we've all had that feeling, even if we're not letter writers, of offering perhaps something vulnerable to someone else and wondering if they're going to handle it in a way that will be comfortable to us. That's always a risky proposition.
Well, you mentioned love earlier, and that is something too. It's sort of a hot potato, right? I mean, love and writing about love or writing from a place of love Did you get scared of sentimentality, or was that not something you were worried about? I mean, I'm not saying you should have been. It's not a sentimental novel, but did you worry about that in sort of that one should be more cynical, that you have to temper that, or did you just let those thoughts go, or never had them?
I would say it was akin to, asking a drowning man if he was worried about, how the air would taste. I felt like in my early sobriety, I felt so unlovable, and it was such a dark period. And then through analysis, in the work that I did with my analysts, and he was so impossibly kind to me, and so he really advocated for the best of my soul in a way that was just so transformative. In that part of me that wanted to love, that part of me that wanted to engage with other people, started to come back online, and I knew that was the thing that was saving me. And I think in those dark times, and I think for a lot of us, we would go on the internet and take a look at the world, and it just seemed like hate was coming from every different corner. It just felt like everybody was hating each other. And I admit, in early sobriety, I was very cynical about the world. The world looked incredibly dark to me. And through the pandemic, it looked really dark too. And my analysts did a lot of work to challenge those dark views and to get me to start looking for the good in people and the good in life. And so that was a real struggle for me. That did not come easy. And I think there's a lot of darkness in the novel. And I think that's reflected in there. But I think what I was searching for and what was saving me in real life was love. It was reaching out to people that I had ghosted. It was reconnecting with people. It was finding ways to forgive my family members. It was letting go of the conversations that, I might disagree with somebody politically, and just trying to see them as a human being. Like, focusing on that is what really got me mentally well after a very dark period. And so that's what I try to do in the novel with my characters that are so broken, particularly Lucas. When it comes to politics and things like his soul is so fractured, he can't even begin to grapple with those larger questions. His task is just making it through the day. And in order to make it through the day, I think he has to rely, to quote Tennessee Williams, on the kindness of strangers, and he has to put that out into the world. And one of the things that my analyst really did for me when I was so dark was to get me to see how much I was just seeing what I was reflecting in the world. And so an example I've been using very often is, before I got sober, before I had this transition, when I would go to an airport, I would have the hood up, sunglasses on, earbuds in. I just was blocking out the world. As an introvert, it was very hard for me to go to the airport. And as a result, the airport seemed very scary to me. Everybody seemed reflexively hostile. But after doing this work this time around, I'm going to the airport. There's no hood up, no sunglasses, no earbuds. I'm looking people in the eye. I'm smiling at people. And people seem a lot friendlier this time around. And so I realized that so much of what I was seeing about the world was a projection of my own inner fears, my own darkness. I was projecting it out and seeing it everywhere. And that was a really humbling realization to come to. And so with my characters, that's Lucas's challenge as well. He has this darkness and he's fighting it, and he's trying to grow the best of his soul. Is the quote in the novel, the best of his whole soul wants to love the best of everyone else's soul in the community. And I think that's something that's very essential and primal. And it's something that we probably know when we come into this world how to do. And we lose that ability somewhere along the way. And I know for me, I had to fight pretty hard in my late 40s to get even a little bit of that back. And so I think that's what my characters are really grappling with as well through the novel.
Well, that makes me ask you the question, would you say that you're a really different writer from before? Like, is Silver Linings Playbook from a different style, a different person? Does it feel that way to you, or does it feel of a piece?
No, I feel very different. I feel like this novel is, and it's not that I'm ashamed of my former work. I'm a very intuitive creative, and I think for most of my career, I didn't really understand what I was doing. I felt like I was just intuitively creating things and putting them into the world. But the Jungian analysis has really given me a chance to step back and see actually what I'm doing, to become a little bit more metacognitive about it. And so I think that this was a much more conscious attempt at writing a novel, and I think it was much more informed, where I was looking at my own psychology as I was writing it. And so I do think that this is a much more intentional piece. I think that I'd like to think that I'm a much more mature person, and I'm a much more sober person too, as well. And there's pluses and minuses with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think I think about this a lot? You know, we're in these dark times in so many ways.
Mm.
How can readers feel hopeful? I mean, the act of reading is, again, it's like this sort of radical privacy, and you're saying, I am not going to see what things are happening right now. I'm taking myself away from the news. And
Yeah.
we almost feel, I think a lot of the time, I mean, I can't speak for you or our viewers, but I feel sometimes as if when I step away, it's like I'm a passenger on a plane in seat 23E who feels that she can put her foot on some sort of brake to control the plane. But if you step away and read, get lost in like a 19th century novel or a Matthew Quick novel or whatever you're reading, that you're missing things. Do you feel that there's a way that readers who feel similarly, and maybe I'm the only freak here, can reconnect to that privacy and sense of take a breath and read, and that's the only thing that matters? Is there a way to do that in rough times?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing that comes to mind is that we're living in unprecedented times. You know, I think for most of human existence, your reality was the people you saw in your village, and that's pretty, and maybe you might get news of the distant land, things that happened a long time ago. But I just think we're being bombarded with information all of the time. And I don't know that any of us are really equipped from a mental health standpoint, to process that much information. And so I think that reading a novel is a way to create, I think, what Jung would call a container, and to carve out some time and say, I'm just going to focus on this one thing. And I think we live in a time too where we're encouraged to care about everything. And as human beings, that's probably a noble instinct to care about everything, and to be compassionate and to try to solve problems. But I can't help wondering if the mental health epidemic might be suggesting that we're not properly wired to care about everything simultaneously. And I think that we need to be kind to ourselves and say, we all have limitations. And, I think reading a novel could be construed as a selfish act when there's so much horrific things going on in the world. But I also think that we need time in our lives to work on ourselves, to work on our own personal empathy, to work on our own demons, to figure out who we are. And I think that sometimes we forget that maybe, the old adage of put your own oxygen mask on before you put the oxygen mask on other people. I think that that's a cliche because it's true. And I think for me, especially as someone who worked as a teacher for 8 years, I tried to save everyone in the classroom. I tried to be superhero teacher, and that resulted in me becoming an alcoholic and quitting teaching after 8 years. So I think that these things that are sometimes construed as maybe selfish or navel gazing, I think we have to remember, for most of human existence, we weren't asked to care about everything that was going on in the world simultaneously. And so I think we can cut ourselves some slack somewhere along the line and say, it's okay to read a novel, or it's okay to take some time out and unplug and go for a walk. It's okay to deal with the things that are right in front of us. Or maybe for me, it was okay to take a couple of years off to get sober. Like, that was essential for me. And, in early sobriety, looking at the news was not a healthy thing for me to do. And I think taking that time off led to being able to participate in a conversation with you, travel around the country and contribute now. So I do think that it's important.
When you read now, what do you want a novel to do?
What do I want a novel to do? I think that I want a novel to elevate me out of passivity. I think I wanted to awaken something in me. I think I want to feel something intensely. I want to feel that things are possible. I want a novel to help me keep moving forward in life towards whatever that thing might be, but to inspire me, to make me feel, to make me to believe. One of the things I've been thinking a lot, particularly about this novel and in work in general, is that I've really been leaning towards things that are life affirming. And I think that there's so much of what I'm seeing in the world, be it the news or just people's attitudes, it's anti-life affirming. And, again, I realize you risk being called sentimental or naive, but I do think that having this attitude of life can be beautiful and there are things to accomplish, and that we have to remember what those good things are, like what makes life worth living, and looking for those things, and remembering those things without turning a blind eye to all of the negative as well. But I think we don't really need in this day and age to be reminded of all the negative things. I think we're constantly being bombarded with that. Like everywhere you look, people are pointing out all of the negative things. So I think, creating stories that are life affirming, I think have become really important to me.
And yet your novel is also about dark things too.
Yeah.
You're certainly not avoiding them at all. There's a line that I love by Zadie Smith in an essay she wrote on the novel. She says, "When I write, I'm trying to express my way of being in the world." And I thought of that when I was reading your book, because you're describing, this isn't your story per se. This is an invented story and you're an inventive writer. But I guess that seems like it's true for you now. Your way of being in the world, right, is not dissimilar from Lucas Goodgame's way of being in the world in some way.
I would say that's true. And the people who are showing up that want to work, both my editor, Jofi Ferrari Adler, and the people that are showing up in Hollywood to help me with the adaptation, I think they're also trying to live this way. So I feel in some ways the novel was putting up a flag, and the people who have rallied around that have become somewhat of a tribe for me, and that's been a really healing and beautiful thing.
So you're writing the adaptation currently?
Yes. Yeah.
How's that? I mean, it's like, does it let you just go deeper into the characters, or use your blooper reel, or what?
It's been interesting. It's early days, and I can't say too much about it. But I think one of the things that I'm working with a very famous director I can't name, but one of the things that he keeps talking about is just making sure that people are going to go along for this ride, and capturing as many people as possible, and making sure they don't get up to go get popcorn in the first act, and so this very practical, craft-oriented conversations. And when you're, as a novelist, I want to keep going back to the big themes and the Jungian stuff, but it's almost like reverse engineering it and breaking it down to appeal to as many people as possible. And I think earlier on in my career, when I was a young man, I would have taken a very dim view of those types of conversations. But I think in sobriety and in my maturity, to realize that, we have something to say. Let's try to reach as many people as possible and do this in a way that's intelligent, but also it's going to be really effective, because we're really fighting for people's attention these days. We're fighting against TikTok, where people can watch 30-second videos all day long, and we're asking somebody to watch a 2-hour film. So to be really cognizant of that it's a new conversation.
Well, even as a novelist, you're asking somebody for, when you read a book on Kindle and it tells you have, 83 hours left, it's like,
Yeah.
reading War and Peace, that's something that's saying the novel, can impose upon somebody's life and time it better be good. It better have meaning and be worth it when you see that thing. We used to get away with that. You know, it didn't tell us how many, at our reading pace, you would have 16 hours left. Now you know, and you know how much your time is worth.
Yeah.
And again, to go back to my analysis novel analogy, it's like slow life, right? Versus the pace of life. The speeded up pace of life, the speeded up growth of a flower movies that we used to see in school. The novel is the opposite of that.
Yeah.
It needs to take as long as it needs to take, both to write it and also to read it. And there's something radical in that, I think, to do that in this day and age, to say, I'm going to write something slow because I need to explore things slowly, and I'm going to ask people for their time in that way.
Yeah, early on in analysis, you know, when I was still misbehaving in analysis and I was frustrated, I hadn't bought in, you know, about 2 months in, I remember saying to my analyst, when am I going to write again? I'm paying you all this money. How long is this going to take? And I remember him saying to me, he had this really great expression on his face. And he said, oh, it's interesting. You think you can do this in 2 months? And I said, well, why? How long did it take you? Because I knew he had been in analysis. He said, it took me 20 years. And I thought to myself, wow, this is a journey. This is in the beginning of analysis, that felt really scary. But as I've kind of stretched out and embraced that, I think, well, I've been in analysis for 2.5 years. There's much journey left to go, and that's important, you know, and that's healing.
Yep. Now, I think if we have any questions, this is the time that I don't know if we do. If not, I'm always happy to continue to talk to you. Wait, there's one. Is there an unanswered question? Sophie, you're our question master.
Yeah, let me ask. We have a question from Lucas, which is actually really interesting because that's the character's name. I feel like because of the news, we've become really desensitized to tragedy. In what way does this book respond to that?
Well, I would say that, you know, when the news comes in, we focus on certain elements of tragedy, you know, and I think we focus on, particularly in these shootings, you know, who is the shooter and why did they do it, and how do we fix this? And, you know, all of these questions are really important questions, but I don't know that we focus so much on what happens a year later to these communities and how are these communities shattered and how do they put them back together. You know, the story is about two brothers, and, you know, one brother walks into a movie theater and shoots people. The other brother shoots movies in the community. And what is the difference between those brothers? And, you know, I would say that the community loved one of those kids and the community didn't give love to the other kid. And so I think that these are very, very complicated and nuanced discussions. And I think that when we try to put them into 5-minute news stories or sound bites or people arguing, I think we miss opportunities to really get to the heart of the problem. And so the story is really about people and what's driving this community and healing, and these questions of how do we not only stop these things from happening, but how do we account for the fact that they have happened in our community, and how do we address that? So I think it takes a more nuanced and complicated view of it. And like Meg said, I think it slows things down. And for me, it was really important to not make this novel about a shooting in a movie house, but actually make it about the people that exist in this town after that has already happened. So that was very important to me.
Great.
We have another question. I love both of your books. Can you go back to the very beginning of this interview when Meg referenced the Ruby Slippers dedication? Was there something more Meg wanted to say, and did it perhaps have something to do with her book Surrender Dorothy?
No, I know it has nothing to do with my book Surrender Dorothy, although I do think I have to say that the path of Dorothy Gale in The Wizard of Oz is one of the more moving movie house and movie experiences that I've ever had in my life. And if you're a writer and you want to think about character, Obviously, those characters pop in a very big way, and they represent aspects of the self. But even more than that, there's a great beauty and depth to them. I wasn't thinking about them, but I was thinking, I'm glad you referred to it again, the person who asked the question, because you dedicate the book to Jungian. I don't know what your particular reference to the ruby slippers means to you, but I guess I would ask you, Matthew, and maybe you can even be more, you can answer specifically this, but also even more generally, when you wrote this book, was it for one person? And when we write generally, do you think from an early age, I mean, in my own experience, you start off writing for someone, and then when you really reach a different point, you have to give that up, but then maybe you can do it again. Well, as in your case, possibly. But I've been through all of that myself. The idea of writing as a gift for someone in a way, the idea of saying, oh, wow, I'm writing for myself, the idea of the beauty of writing to someone who has given you something. So that's all I was thinking about, but I'm sure you have some things to say to that.
Yeah, I think for most of my career, I wrote for my wife. She was my, Kurt Vonnegut always said you have to write for one person. And I was a big Kurt Vonnegut fan as a young man. And so Alicia was my one person. But I do think that this novel, I was writing it in response to my relationship with my analyst, which was really important. And, The Wizard of Oz is a fantastic story for so many reasons, but to do a Jungian kind of take on it is very fascinating. And, the whole idea with Dorothy is that she thinks she has to go to the wizard because the wizard's going to solve all of her problems. But really what that's called is positive projection. Like she has the power to do it herself, but she's projecting that onto this great Wizard of Oz. And it's only when she takes that projection back that she realizes she had the power to do that all along. And I think that that's really what analysis is. I went to analysis thinking this other person has to heal me. And of course, my analyst did amazing things for me and illuminated so much and was so giving and caring. But the only person that really could do the work to heal me was me. And I think that's the thing that my analyst taught me. And so, clicking the red ruby slippers 3 times is just a metaphor for realizing that, you have to bring it home to you, and that the power to do that always resides within you. And I think particularly we're living in a moment where we really are looking to solve things externally all the time, when most of the problem, not all of the problem, but a lot of the problem, and in my case, a lot of the problem was an internal problem. And for much of my life, I was saying, oh, it's out there. It's those people. It's that people. It's the way I was raised. It's my family. But I never was really looking in here for the answers. And so the Jungian work I do is really a journey inward. And my analyst has been a wonderful guide. And I think early on, he was like this Oz-like figure to me that I thought he's the person that's going to save me. And he played that role masterfully for me. But at a certain point, I realized that while he is this wise and powerful person, he really is, it's me that has to save me. And I think that's really what the novel is about, too.
I think novels, we read novels. Well, one of the things that we get from novels is empathy, of course. I mean, there was a study that sort of, kind of showed that we who love novels sort of knew that all along, right?
Yeah.
But that's the power, I think, that they give us. I feel when I read something I love, I feel so excited. It's almost as if, I didn't write it, but you get fused with the writer. You're so happy. You're in such a happy state because you find a line that the writer was so excited when he or she wrote it, and it speaks to you. And there's this just little fusing moment that I think is just so tremendous. And it's powerful for the reader, and it was powerful for the writer too. Mm-hmm. Everybody shares the power in a way, which is sort of what you're describing.
And it transcends time too, because something that's powerful to us in a room when we're writing it, someone could discover that 100 years from now, which is so magical.
Yeah. Really or even better, 6 months from now.
Yeah. And you get paid maybe.
Or 2 weeks from now and buying it in bulk at Books and Books. What can I say?
Yeah.
What can I say?
Well said.
If anybody has any last minute questions, please go ahead and ask. If not, I think those are all the questions we have for tonight. I really want to thank both of you for hopping on, and this conversation was super enlightening. I really, really enjoyed it. And on behalf of Books and Books, thank you guys so much. I'm talking.
Yeah. Pleasure. Everybody buy this book. It's wonderful, and really happy to see you.
Plugging away.
Always the writer's job.
Yeah, I've been trained.
No, it's really wonderful. Congratulations again, and thank you everybody for coming.
Yeah, thanks so much, and thanks, Meg, for being here. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you, everyone. Happy holidays, and have a great rest of your day wherever you are.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.